Hello, my name's Scott Vashel. I'm with the Greater Washington, D.C. chapter of ISACA, and I'd like to welcome you to our panel discussion, COVID-19, a global perspective on technology and change. The three chapters of ISACA, Singapore, London, and Greater Washington, D.C. have come together to create a panel to discuss these topics. You know, it's been, to the best of my knowledge, it's the first time since the Second World War where all three regions have experienced the same threat to our personal health and to our economy, our well-being. And so it's a great time, an ideal time to come together, collaborate, share experiences. There might be some cultural difference here and there, but there's a broad base of common area that it's worth talking and exchanging, and I hope you'll enjoy our discussion. Before we get started, I'd like to go around and let the panelists introduce themselves. Let's start with Singapore. Forum, would you please?
Sure. Thanks, Scott. And once again, as you mentioned, unprecedented times call for creative measures, and it is really nice in some sense to be on this panel with you, DC chapter, as well as Alan, the UK London chapter, and discuss exactly how, from a professional community perspective, everybody's dealing with us. So my name is Form. I am the Asia Pacific Chief Security Officer for PayPal. Look after our product launches, market entry, governance, all the aspects that ISACA talks and preaches and provides education on. In my day job, I guess it sounds like sometimes, I'm also the president of the Singapore chapter. And again, it's amazing to see on one hand how resilient the community is, how from tracing apps and other aspects that we are going to talk about, we are trying to respond as a community and humanity in some sense, the scale of it. So once again, thanks a lot for this opportunity to organize this, Scott and Sheila.
Thank you. Alan? Alan's mute.
Apologies, sorry. Good afternoon from sunny London. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here. Thanks for the Cecilia and Forum and Scott for setting this up. So my name is Alan Boardman. I'm a long-time ISACA volunteer over 20 years, including ISACA London chapter president, and also serves on the international board 2011 to 2014. My background is in risk, security, governance in predominantly large American investment banks. Nowadays, I help businesses manage their risks around cyber and privacy, working through my company, cyberadvisory.london. Thank you, and again, it's a real honor being here. Thank you.
Sushila?
Hi, so I am Sushila Nair, and I am the security offer leader at Entity Data Services. And our role as a global IT services company is to really leverage technology to be able to help our clients meet what their missions are. And I have the pleasure of spending much time with clients looking at the area of cybersecurity and how we can help. In my non-free time, I also serve on the board of the ISACA Greater Washington, D.C. chapter, which is a wonderful way to give back and also participate in the community. And it's great being on this forum discussion.
Well, great. Well, thank you all. So today what we're going to do is we're going to cover 4 topics. Now, they might overlap, but one we're going to call hero stories, and we'll get into that shortly. Then pivoting, how businesses have adjusted to this rapidly changing environment. We'll also touch on cybersecurity, and then we'll look to the future to see what type of changes we see coming up and some challenges that might be there. So I just want to mention, we're going to do some polling. There'll be 4 questions that'll be spread out through the talk. These are anonymous, but they will pop up on your screen. We'll give you about 10 to 15 seconds to please answer them, and then we'll discuss the results. So let's get started with hero stories. And what's a hero story? Let me give you an example right here in Washington, D.C. area. We have a company that is headquartered here, but really serves the whole country. And they have over 40,000 employees, and they all were working in an office environment. In 2 weeks, they turned that around and put them all to remote access, which is a hero story in itself. Now, this isn't to distract from the healthcare workers, which God love them. They have just done a marvelous job and they deserve all the accolades they have. But there's also on the technology side, there's been some minor heroes, if you will, that have really succeeded. So let's go around the panel and discuss heroes. Alan, would you like to lead off?
So yeah, I think you know, what's been phenomenal is just people's willingness to come together, share, you know, help others. I want to call out two specific examples that I've seen in the UK, which I think are phenomenal. One relates to it's a small consultancy that is basically rise to the challenge, and they've right from the outset, I think in the first week of lockdown, they put it out there that they were offering totally free consultancy services for healthcare and other organizations at the forefront of this pandemic, allowing them to do a free IT security health check, and you know, focusing on things like remote working, BCP, phishing attacks, and some pen tests as well. So I think they should really be called out to someone who's, you know, for their own free time, they're offering those services. And related to that is another organization of volunteers, cyber volunteers, that have been set up, started in the UK, it's now gone right across Europe. I believe they've just opened in Russia as well, providing advice, services, again, to healthcare and related organizations. And a lot of it is around, you know, best practices, translating it into other languages, etc. So I think those two organizations really need to be called out. But it'd be a miss for me from the UK not to mention Captain Tom. So this is not specific cyber, but just a very quick line. Captain Tom, a war veteran, 99-year-old, was doing a 10-meter walk laps around the garden, raising money for the National Health Service charities in the UK. Their target was £1,000. To date, I think they've now closed it, but he turned 90 last week. Sorry, 100 last week, and he raised over £32 million for the National Health Services. So for me, that's the hero story. And just kind of related to that, he also put out a record and it went to #1 straight away. So there's my hero story.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Farum, you want to?
Sure. I'll take an example of, you know, while we have seen a lot of stimulus packages being announced all around the world, something I felt a little bit unique and truly a hero story was the Monetary Authority of Singapore. In addition to, you know, relaxing the loan repayment terms, EMI expectations, and other things, this is the first time that I've seen a regulator announce a 125 million stimulus package to help regulated financial institutions once the crisis has subsided, you know, to invest in upskilling people that have lost the jobs within the financial sectors, for SMEs to start investing in digitization of their businesses, in procuring tools and technologies that help them rather come back faster and in a better way to be able to deal with, you know, the time and the resources that have been lost. So I felt it's truly, you know, setting an example in terms of creating you know, an environment where there is a support that people can look up to. I will probably take the opportunity to also share some, you know, again, we have seen individuals coming up and looking at from a community level how we can do our best to help out those that have been impacted. And we have an engineer here in our development center at PayPal who decided to kind of stand up a site where it's pretty simple website where, you know, people or families that have been impacted by the crisis and don't have enough money to buy groceries or other things can just list out the items that they would like help with. And, you know, people who want to help can come in and tie up with the grocery store to buy vouchers that go to the store through the portal that the engineer created and keeps the grocery available. I mean, you know, people can come in and talk about abuse and other aspects that that's going on. But that aside, just the ability to leverage the technical skills that people have in creating something that at least attempts to solve some of the really immediate and drastic issues that people are facing. I felt, that an engineer definitely is my hero.
These are wonderful stories that people are stepping up and taking the initiative to really help others and put themselves forward. I just love this. Shashila, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this, during this pandemic, there's been so many heroes that have come forward, and it's extraordinary what people have achieved. So I know from just the experience of NTT Data, right, we had actually helped the city of New York distribute 300,000 iPads, right, out all of those children who suddenly need devices and being able to go out there and study and participate. An enormous number of people that I know that actually have volunteered to help teachers understand things like how to have secure remote conferencing, right? Another example was a hospital that we helped at as well. Again, had to go remote pretty much overnight. I mean, people were doing it, as you said, in the space of a week, in 2 weeks, right? 10,000 people that they had to make remote whilst the hospital was responding in the midst of that crisis in New York. So they were working, 24 hours a day. So enormous amounts of heroes. And even on that small level, as Forum said, for small businesses, I know one of the local businesses over here who runs a cycling fitness organization. Extraordinary woman. What she did was when she realized she had to close shop because of what she did was she picked those bikes up, right, and held a raffle and rented the bikes. And today, everybody joins her class online. She's got onto an app and she's enabling exercising remotely, which I think is phenomenal. I mean, this rise of yoga teachers and trainers that are really inspiring, I think is wonderful. So many, many heroes and many, many wonderful stories.
Well, I've done the yoga. I've joined, and she's great. She's great. She comes on a lunch hour and she keeps it to 30 minutes and varies it, and it's a great way, and it's helping everybody. And they're the people. They're the unsung heroes that are stepping forward. So, we're going to do our first question now, but we'll go ahead and load it if you'd like. It's again, it's anonymous. If you could just take a moment to answer that. What we've had is a situation where we're working from home a lot more. So we're just trying to find out how people feel about this. Do they want to return to the office, or are they looking to maybe enjoy working from home? We'll give you a few more moments. All right. That should be good. Looks like we have a far majority, 72%, like working from home. So are we looking at a paradigm shift here?
So
there we go.
Yeah, so Scott, if I could jump in there, I mean, I think, going forward, things are going to be different. And many organizations, I guess, were already set up to work from home. But for those that weren't, they've had to get used to it very quickly. And they've probably come to the realization that, there are many things that can be done working remotely. So I think we're definitely going to see a change there. I mean, the other thing is, working from home being an exception in most cases, maybe 1 or 2 days a week, whereas now people are working from home all the time. You don't become an expert by doing it once or twice a week. So people are now finding better ways, becoming more productive. So I think we do see the paradigm shift there. I think a lot more organizations are going to follow a model of we're having people working remotely. on a much more regular basis.
Hmm. Sushila?
Yeah, it's probably worth kind of noting. I think it's interesting that for many, there's been a big difference in different vertical sectors. For instance, in the technology sector, we've always had quite a large proportion that is work from home. And in other sectors, there may be a more traditional approach, and even in different countries as well, right? So that we've seen different countries having different cultural acceptances around work from home. And what I see is this acceleration into the future, that perhaps we were always going to some degree, work more from home because it solves many problems. It solves the problems of commuting. It solves the problem of saving time. And you know, when they actually looked at people's health statistics, people actually said they felt healthier when they worked from home, which was kind of interesting. We see that also reflected in the reality goes, I think there is huge amounts of interest in perhaps as this goes forward that we may in fact adopt this model as being the model that we actually work from. So larger proportions of us will work from home. And we certainly see as well, I know for instance, Warren and I were talking about in India, traditionally there was really not much of a work from home culture. And we're seeing some of the largest IT services companies coming out with announcements saying, you know what, we're going to have our employees work from home even after the pandemic is happening, 75%, 8%. Thinking about the saving of rent and facilities and the happier people, we really can do this effectively and securely, which is the challenge. Then there are many reasons, I think, to stay with this model.
Forum, what do you think this poll reflects things in Singapore or Southeast Asia in general? Is this what you are seeing for yourself?
I think, it is interesting how people are obviously, for obvious reasons, preferring to kind of at least expressing that they would rather work from home because on one hand, they want to stay safe, but also kind of the kind of flexibility that it offers. And from a company perspective, as Sushila mentioned, it does give an extra option. And as Singapore starts to reopen, and we are thinking about the floor plans and spacing design, because it's not going to be 100% ready on day one, come June 1st, or whenever the reopening happens, depending on the situation. I do think it brings an interesting, predicament for organizations like us that have customer service operations that deal with a lot of sensitive data, and have to look after not just external threats, but also looking at insider suspicious activities, and have to follow certain processes, have to have certain controls. And it's not easy to make sure that for especially certain roles within the company, how you can implement and kind of get the right kind of controls implemented. So for instance, for us, not only do we have to make sure that they have the right tooling from a digitization perspective and logging in and have the right type of bandwidth. And as we all know, once again, from this part of the world, while we have kind of leapfrogged through broadband and moved directly into mobile, not every home has the right type of connection everywhere. And while everybody can't wait for 5G to happen, we're not quite there yet from a pure, ability for individuals from an infrastructure perspective, from just the home environment perspective, to be able to work properly. For us, it is a very important aspect of how our customer service functions operate in a timely manner. So not only, again, onboard the right type of merchants, onboard the right type of customers, perform eKYC processes, collect sensitive data when needed, support them on a customer service aspects. And that does create a lot of new types of risks that we have to now think about as a company that is both regulated, but also has trust as their biggest pillar, to think, how do we manage these new types of risks, considering that the work from home environment, is going to stay there for foreseeable future, at least.
That was a marvelous pivot into our second topic, which is how did they pivot? Thanks for that. Yeah, PayPal is so huge and covers so international. Everybody will be watching the effect, but it sounds like you've already made a lot of positive moves. But let's talk about this pivoting a little bit more before we go into cybersecurity.
Sure.
Well, we've had, I think of a local university here, George Mason University. I'm involved with them to some degree, and they were able to, within days, to move their whole sessions, classrooms online. And so there's an example of pivoting. Be able to take technology and use it to adjust. Does anyone else have any thoughts about that on the pivoting? We talked about the yoga teachers and the bike rentals and so forth, but another example is I go to the stores and now I'm seeing that near the registers are putting up a plastic screen. So at least they can, engage and feel there's some type of protection. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think certainly for most organizations, and I think as Forum mentioned, there are often constraints in the way that we do business that may not exactly lend itself to the condition that we're in now, which is work from home and isolate. So the reality goes, the capability to pivot really is going to ensure whether or not you are successful. Because without any doubt, this is going to go on for a while, right? So looking at what our business processes are and how we can reinvent them, as you said, in the brilliant example of how many exercise instructors have started to make Zoom work for them, or whatever video conferencing they're using. Incredible example, right? Definitely restaurants having to pivot around to be able to support home delivery, right? And really understand how to connect with their clients in different ways. I've seen wine tastings go online, doing Facebook streaming, delivering your wine tasting so you can do that from home. I've seen families certainly doing family reunions, right, over video conferencing. So the capability on a much larger scale for organizations, we see, for instance, Teladoc, hospitals, right, saying, you know what, don't come in if you're not feeling well. First, do a video conferencing session with your doctor, right? It's safer that way. They can actually prescribe remotely. So here we are reinventing something that we would not have thought, and we're actually very successfully looking at that with enormous amounts of benefits. And that is a model that we will keep into the future with healthcare, because there are so many reasons you would want to do that. So definitely very exciting capability to pivot. And I think organizations should use this time to look at how they can leverage, especially technology, to be able to connect and conduct business using different paradigms in order to be able to cope with the restrictions that the pandemic is placing upon us.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to mention a few, and totally agree with you, Cecilia. Some organizations have had to reinvent themselves just to stay in business, and particularly the restaurant industry, but also the event organizers. And I think ISACA is a good example. I mean, we've got North American CACs running next week, totally virtual. That's an amazing kind of way of having to adopt very quickly and adapt to the current situation. And also ISACA provides, total online exams now. They've had to make that change very, very quickly. So organizations have been forced into making these very rapid changes, some of them quite innovative, whereas before they may have gone through a massive transformational program that may have run for years. They've had to do this literally in the space of a couple of months. So I guess the ones that are, more agile, are able to adapt and adopt to these new circumstances, are really the ones that are going to be more successful.
I think if I may, Scott,
yes,
just expand a little bit on what I shared earlier. I mean, for those of us as a community within risk, security, compliance professionals, just like I said, we've had to, just for this pivot or adjustment that we have had to make, there is aspects that touches the risk professionals within the organization, global investigations, compliance team, information security, physical security. Because, if you think about a typical journey of a customer, again, from a financial services perspective, now from an InfoSec perspective, we have to create new models for insider threat detections. also look at risk and suspicious activities from an external perspective that are new, because COVID-related scams and phishing and all of those have completely gone through the roof. And I know we're gonna touch on some of the security aspects in the cybersecurity aspect. But just to look at just as fraud happens, the way we would engage law enforcement has completely changed. It used to be that we wouldn't consider it safe to discuss and divulge all the details over email or any type of a normal electronic channels. And now we've had to either find the right type of encryption tools on both sides, or find a way to make sure that they would get that in some other manner. Onboarding and whitelisting of the right type of merchants versus trying to put stop to all the bad type of merchants trying to sell home treatments or fake cures for COVID and other things is extremely important for us to, again, develop new types of risk and fraud models quickly to start catching them, price gouging and a lot of other things that people, these perpetrators rely on these type of crises to try and compromise system integrity and create some fraud. And just overall reporting has completely shifted. I mean, a lot of us right now is the earnings report and are trying to kind of find ways to meet those calendars. And we had to shift our earning dates back by a couple of weeks just because, it was a new way of doing the business to find the appropriate time to not only manage the regulatory and compliance requirements, but also do justice to what reporting obligations we have. So we will see this, that the adjustments, again, as Alan mentioned, right, every single model, the time that the organization takes to do the pivot, and more importantly, the way in which they do it and how many stakeholders you kind of bring with you versus how do you manage the abuse or the corner cases of abuse or potential abuse. From a risk professional's perspective, as all of us kind of deal with the new wave of digitization from teleconferencing to digital payments and everything in between, is extremely interesting to see how that space is evolving. And for everything else that happens, I'm sure that our community overall, there's huge job security, but also a huge responsibility on us and how we are able to support our organizations and the community at large.
Excellent. Yes, yes. It might be a good time. Let's put up our second question. If you could take a moment to answer that, because we're trying to see how you feel about if you have the tools to work remotely and collaborate and do it in a secure setting. Again, this is anonymous, but if you could take time to answer that, give us a little feedback. We'll pause. Well, it looks like it's a strong majority that feel they have the tools and are secure, and to some degree, some have all the necessary tools, but are let's see. Yep, final results. So it looks like again that people feel they have the necessary tools and believe they have a secure connection for the most part. There's some concern about some not being secure, but majority feel comfortable with that. So it looks like the companies have pivoted well to adjust to this. Any final comments on that? Let's, in fact, since we're talking about secure, let's go right into cybersecurity. Zscaler.
Just wanted to, sorry, Scott, to
Oh, sure.
Robin Davis on the chat had an interesting comment about those in the manufacturing sector obviously can't do these things remotely. And it'll be interesting to see how, from a physical security perspective, we're able to ensure that the work environment is still, changed and the way that from a distancing and all the other precautionary measures that the companies need to take in to support their working. So there are a lot of industries where obviously people have to go in. It's not all digital yet. So it'll be interesting to see how that health risk is managed while the productivity that needs to come in back and help the economic growth continues to or starts to spin back.
Well, I'm
I
glad you
just thought
brought
it
that.
was an interesting comment.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. In fact, I just did a webinar on that, on the supply chain, and looked at the food industry. And if you look at the processing plants and so forth, the people work in very close proximity. It's going to be very difficult to keep productivity up to a high degree and still be able to um, uh, keep people safe. So people are literally elbow to elbow in a lot of these situations. So there's a lot of redesign that has to go on. In the US, companies, we've had, I think, 300 employees tested positive in a meatpacking plant in South Dakota. So there's been a lot of concern, and how do you handle this? And also, once you break a link in that supply chain, I don't want to go too into the supply chain, but once you break that link, it has a wide reaching effect. For instance, if the processing factories, plants are not going to be operational, then you're looking at culling millions of animals that have been raised to process to feed the food chain. So it has great ramifications, and you're right, we're not there yet. There's no easy answer on this. So it's part of that change. It's not technology, as you mentioned, but it's a very important factor. Alan?
Yeah, Scott, and also just to pick up the point Farah made about the celebrating success of pivoting. The crisis it's a comment made by Esther Hitch, which I think is very relevant. So the crisis is broadening the inequality of low skilled and physical jobs, which will be left further behind. So we have to be very conscious of how we bring those industries and those people along with us. This is really emphasizing that there's a huge divide.
Yes, it is. And maybe this is the type of thing that brings us to light and then work towards a solution rather than pushing it aside and ignoring it. And, let's see, there might be situations where technology can somehow come in and help with that. For instance, and just to go back to supply chain, we're looking at AI there, we're looking at blockchain, and part of that whole view is to not just look immediate on your whole side, but the team across the whole approach to the supply chain to work together. And that includes the people who are actually doing the processing. So maybe these technology changes might lend some avenue to starting to focus on these areas and to realize we're all in this together and to come up with a solution that satisfies everyone.
Yes, one of just a point I think that's interesting, and what I'm seeing outside in actually particularly in manufacturing is very large manufacturing organizations. Some of them actually, because there is less requirements for whatever they're manufacturing at the moment, they've actually kind of taken themselves offline, depending on what they're manufacturing, and actually using this opportunity to completely upgrade their manufacturing. And unfortunately, the reverse to some degree is going to happen. This acceleration into the future will result in increased automation and a greater, in fact, loss of labor that is not highly skilled. I think for many organizations, the takeaway from the pandemic has been, unfortunately, when I was very reliant on people and manual processes, they broke. And so as people, have gone into the pandemic, and this right now, I think at the moment, they're kind of sitting back and they're going, okay, what do I do now? I've got my workers remote, here we are. What do we do next? And I think where they're going to look at is they're going to look at investing at securing their workforce, but also at looking at new paradigms that will involve higher levels of automation. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of add that in as being kind of a caution that we don't further aggravate that problem.
Let's shift to cybersecurity because we're kind of in that area already. We've got a broader attack basis here. I mean, it's really opened up. I mean, we had this rapid change where people had to move everybody remotely. You had have manufacturing and other on-site, on-prem type locations that all of a sudden are open up to remote access. That creates all number of issues with configurations, and the bad actors are going after the low-hanging fruit. I mean, there's unpatched, there's systems that have just not been designed to handle this change, and it's put the CISOs and the managers in a very difficult situation. And I will say this, I'm not in any way faulting the businesses who had to change, had to adjust. That's the first thing. If you run a business, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've got to get the product out, you've got to move on it. But our security folks have been put in a situation where now they have to go back and revisit and do another analysis and roll with the punches and be able to adjust and go through these steps to bring it to the fore, to bring us back in. But on Sheila, you know, Zscaler came out, came out and said that there's been a 30,000% increase in phishing, malicious websites, malware targeting remote users. It's just blown up. It's gone off the charts. You want to speak to that? Do you see similar threats?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because at first, you know, some of the bad actors came out and said, oh, you know, we're not going to attack hospitals and it's all going to be done. And really the reality is that has not happened. We have seen a massive surge, you know, in email phishing attacks, either spam advertising, as Forum said, you know, cures for various, for COVID, along with, you know, targeted phishing attacks, malware disguised as like the WHO site where you can go click and find out, you know, what the infection rate is, and it's secretly stealing your data and background. So a massive increase in threats. And in fact, we see just in the last couple of days, the largest European hospital subject to a ransomware attack, a snake ransomware attack. So, and in fact, one of the hero stories I didn't mention is, in fact, from World Health Day, NTT actually came out and said, we will help hospitals with incident response for the next 60 days at kind of at no charge. So that is a recognition of the amount of attacks that have actually occurred because of this. So, you know, much as we've discussed, I think that people have done a phenomenal job at a very short length of time getting their workforce out and getting them remote. But for many organizations, even though they had some remote workers, they didn't have 90% of their workers remote, right? So we're seeing a lot of things where the old way of doing things, or the old paradigm where we're taking all our traffic back to HQ and actually looking and inspecting it in a central location, that doesn't really lend itself to the same scalability, right? So looking at organizations saying, I need to kind of change my paradigm. And as Forum said, how do you protect data, right? When people are working remotely, right? How are you going to encrypt it? How are you going to impose policy around different classifications of data? And these are the next problems that people are going to solve. Many people, you know, in response to the pandemic, did things like roll out Microsoft Teams, which is a great tool to be able to easily collaborate and chat and talk. But have they appropriately secured it, you know, is the next step we have to go to. And since they pushed out all those remote machines, and oh my goodness, in the States, right, you could not buy laptops. They just went off the shelves. And so pushing out VDIs may have been a solution you want to stay with, or maybe you don't, you know. So we've got here. Now I think we need to sit and kind of assess where we are. And then along with the fact that we know that there's an increased amount of threats in the short term, you know, increasing your filtering, looking at moving away from this model where you have to do everything back at headquarters. So things like web secure gateways, you know, kind of like a Zscaler model where you're moving that security closer to those endpoints, moving towards a zero trust model, because we don't know how secure your home network is, right? It might be pretty bad, right? So really taking an approach that we don't know what the security is, and so we have to constantly validate, and that's what zero trust is. It's not a product, it's a framework. to say I have to continuously validate this user. So bottom line is we've seen an increased, a very high rise in threats. We need to be able to increase the technology to be able to detect these threats. We need to increase our technology to be able to patch remotely and make sure that the infrastructure that we currently have is being managed appropriately. Move to a paradigm of zero trust so that we're improving on that, and acknowledge that some of the supply chain shortages. So for instance, we know, we can predict because of the pandemic first happening in China, that we're going to have supply chain shortages around servers, right? So we're going to see this move, which anyway was happening towards the cloud. And as one of the themes of this conversation, this acceleration of the future, we are undoubtedly going to see an acceleration into cloud, because we're not going to, you wait 4 or 5 weeks for your server for your project, or you go, maybe I'll do this in the cloud. And the cloud has also shown incredible amounts of resilience and has some real benefits from a work from home capability. So definitely, I think this time involves a re-examination of where we are to validate that we really are secure, and the fact that we may have to change some of the paradigms that we work towards to being more in line with kind of a zero trust model.
When you talk about changes coming down the road, we have the situation now with the tracing apps. Now I know, isn't NTT Data doing some work in that area? Oh,
Yes,
and please introduce the idea first, please.
Yes, so contact tracing apps, subject to some discussion around privacy, we'll come to that. So contact tracing apps are basically apps that are used to enable people to self-report their symptoms. And when the symptoms are in line with requiring a test, they'll send you some kind of QR code so that you can go ahead and book your test, go into your centers, really simplifying this process, right? You go and do the test, if you test positive, what it will do is it will warn the people that have come in contact with you that, hey, you've been infected and they might want to try and self-isolate, or that you have symptoms and that they may want to self-isolate. So in fact, NTT Data, working with the City of Austin to do exactly that, to release an app that enables people to do this. Now we have several choices with the pandemic. We can all stay at home and isolate. We can choose to ignore it, and we know, as you said, they did that to some degree in some of the food manufacturing, and that did not work out well. And the third one is to do contact tracing. The challenge with contact tracing is you need at least 80% of the people to be able to use the app to really make it effective, right? And
Right.
so the challenges is
Otherwise,
is around people's nervousness, perhaps about privacy. Both Apple and Google have come out and said that they're going to produce a contact tracing app that doesn't use location dependence, but actually uses kind of Bluetooth, right? A light Bluetooth version, which may be more private. But essentially, from a capability to be able to function in society while staying safe, contact tracing apps offer us great promise of benefits, provided enough of us use it. And concerns around, obviously there's a lot of concerns for governments having that information, as well as private sector, right? The private sector has not had a good record, especially in social media, of being able to retain that information. However, they pushed this app out during the pandemic, and the word is that they would remove it. That really sounds much better. But each of the different locations pretty much are coming up with their own approach to contact tracing apps, whether that's in the UK or Australia or the City of Austin. But the theory is always the same, is, being able to alert people that they may be infected so they can take the appropriate action, which is a very powerful tool to enable us to keep our economy safe while keeping humans also safe, which is,
Well, let's go to our third polling question, and we'll come back and discuss it for the different regions. Give us some feedback as to countries are requiring and encouraging citizens to download the contact tracing app. How comfortable are you with the download and to engage the app on your phone? I'll give you a few moments. it looks like we have people who are, I'd say, generally uneasy or have some reservations. So thank you for that. Alan, would you like to
Yeah,
comment on that?
so in the UK, we've this week started rolling out a pilot in the Isle of Wight. So the Isle of Wight, south of England, it's a small island. It's a ferry across, about a half an hour ferry journey, 140,000 population. It started rolling out to council staff and health workers on, I think on Tuesday, and today the general public on the Isle of Wight can download it as well. So running as a pilot, it's fraught with problems, but you have to go down this route. So it's very much a centralized app. So the only personal data it will collect is the first part of your postcode, which can potentially identify you. But then there's an opt-in where you can enter more personal data. So obviously people are concerned, and I mean, Sheila made a really good point about it has to have a large uptake for it to be effective. So it runs on Bluetooth. That basically, you've got to self-identify, and if you've identified in contact with someone close by, it tells them that they need to, do something as well. So, the jury's out. We need to see how this goes. It feels like a minefield, but we have to start doing something. And I think one of the challenges of the UK's approach is slightly different from some of our countries across the channel, where they're going for a more decentralized model. So it's going to present all types of challenges when people start traveling, and we're not in sync, and how do you coordinate these things? So yeah, a massive minefield, but we have to start moving down this route.
Yeah. Forum, how about in Southeast Asia, Singapore, even India? Do you have any thoughts on that? Would it have the same reaction, you think, as our poll?
I think so. I mean, in general, Singapore was one of the first countries to, come up with an app and open source it. Some of the, creations around the world that various governments are now using is based on the open trace protocol that Singapore started. So while, it presents an interesting predicament between privacy and safety of the community, it is incredibly important to kind of find, especially in this part of the world, and you mentioned India, for a country like that, if because it's so populous and densely populated, it is important to rely on technology as much as possible. And they were giving out these free devices to allow people to, be traced pretty quickly, so that they could be quarantined and separated out or distanced from the community to spread or stop the spread. But in general, I think the uptake or the download numbers, while they are not completely terrible so far in Singapore, the usage isn't as good because it relies primarily on Bluetooth protocol, which requires that you have to keep the app on every single time you go out in public. It is an extra kind of behavioral change that citizens and users in general kind of have to take and keep it in mind, just like masks and other things. And it's taking a little bit of time to for people to truly adopt it. And that's where I think organizations and community can come in and take an extra role to send regular reminders, to truly encourage use of this, and find ways to give assurance to people that are worried about privacy aspects on how, first of all, at the design level, the implementation takes care of anonymization of not truly, sharing certain types of data. But no matter what, right, there's aspects of data, and there's possibility of, because if there's software, there's possible, there's going to be a bug, and how, even if exploited, I guess the damage could be contained. I think once we are able to kind of get to that point, because it's not just right now that people are going to need this app, it's going to be, increasingly more important. I did want to just take this and talk about something that was going on in chat between Edith and Robin around just the BCP preparation. What is amazing is, while it shows how different organizations that had invested a lot of money in developing BCP plans and truly crisis management aspects, right? Because most of these organizations will have a crisis management playbook and a plan to do texting and other ways of finding out how every single employee is doing and all of that. what was amazing is just less than 2 months before the crisis actually hit, US government had run a tabletop exercise named, I think, codenamed Contagion, to actually mimic or simulate a pandemic type of a scenario. And in spite of that, having done this exercise, we have found that, and in organizations as well, right, at an individual organization, no matter how many BCP tests we have done, exercises that we have done, DR stuff we have done, we've seen that in reality, when it happens, it's so different than what anybody could have imagined. And hence, creation of these type of unique solutions, whether it is contact tracing and other things, kind of are needed and useful to see. But also, it kind of puts some light on how can we constantly evolve our BCP plans at individual organizational level and test them in ways and coming up with scenarios that this crisis is going to serve as a learning experience to kind of take that in our stride and kind of evolve our programs.
Right. Yes. Thanks for that. We're coming up to about 8 minutes left. Let's go up and put up our final question, please, and our poll question, and just give us an idea of how you view the future for your industry and personal employment. Are you optimistic, somewhat pessimistic, or pessimistic? Give you a few moments, and then panelists will wrap up with some of your thoughts of things that might be changing, such as the cashless society and things of that nature. Well, it looks like we're coming with more optimism than pessimism. There are concerns there for some. So we have a very positive audience that views it positively. So that's nice to see. So panel, I just want to open up to whoever would like to talk about this. We're the few minutes here, the future, what we see, what challenges could be such things as cashless society. Are we accelerating towards that? Whether other type of, we've touched on paradigm changes and specific verticals. Any thoughts on that?
I guess for me, I think that this gives us, and I've seen some of the comments coming up on the questions, this is a time where we're forced as a society, and I love the fact this is a global panel, but for globally that we need to collaborate, that we have a chance to control the direction that we're pivoting in, that we pivot for good, that we reinvent ourselves, but reinvent ourselves in the best possible way. Because as Forum said, there will be many crises that we are faced with, and some of them global and serious as this one that we're facing. And we need crisis in the way that we're handling it and the way that we're reacting to provide the very best solutions that we can and the best leadership that we can, because we have a world that right now is really struggling to be able to see the way forward. And so, yeah, and Scott, your story of heroes, it is the story of so many heroes. And so celebrating, I think, heroes and hopefully a pivot to a much better future, because many of the requirements around this and global warming also mirror each other, right? Mm-hmm. So the reinvention of being more effective, collaborating globally, working together to a good future is where I hope very much we will go.
Mm-hmm. Final thoughts, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of echo Susheila's comments there, and the world will be different. And, hopefully we see positives coming out of this. It's still very tough. It's still going to be tough for some time to come. And, my heart goes out to all of those people who are really, really suffering, because there are many. And, are we looking to a greener, fresher, cleaner world going forward? Hopefully this helps us kind of come to that realization.
Yeah. Well, Venice has changed a little bit. Actually, they can see the canal. They can see the water, which is nice. Forum, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think, in general, if I were to summarize, things obviously will change, but I would put them in those three buckets, right? Clearly, I think Stanley mentioned, Sushila mentioned in the comments as well, leadership. It truly shows the importance of communication, importance of empathy and truly understanding how everybody kind of what impacts at the human level the core basic necessities to at an organizational level how different people have to work in different ways. Earlier somebody mentioned so Sushila mentioned giving out iPads in India. I know you can't just digitize and go for online schools because most of the people don't have that facility, so the government started publishing the courses in a national TV channel so that people could at least get some basic, or the kids could get that. But it calls and shows the true character around leadership, and also just making tough decisions. I mean, we saw yesterday Brian Chesky from Airbnb come out and say that because of this and Uber is laying off people, if you do need some personal references, do reach out to me directly, and I'd be more than happy to kind of connect you with some really good people who are working at and won't have jobs. So that's one aspect of it. From a opportunity, somebody mentioned again, I think Sheila did, on automation and AI and different skill sets, upskilling that will be needed, and that in variety of areas, right? Just the proliferation of collaboration, online collaboration, and the technology, and how that's going to power new software, new ways of interacting with each other, will create a lot of new opportunities. And in general, just technology is going to power so much many more aspects of our life. You mentioned cashless payments, right? Just this week, we announced our QR and NFC applications for rest of the world that did not have it. And some parts, embraced it when it started in the East and came to West, but people didn't feel comfortable unless there was a swipe going or some kind of a chip and pin. And now that's going to change quickly. And from purely our perspective, we did not see like a real rise in the fraud or attack numbers with phishing. What we saw was a very, very uniquely different approach, right? So we are being one of the either number one or number two most targeted websites in the world from a phishing perspective. There was 1 week around, I think 23rd March-ish, where we saw 500 new domains with COVID in them registered within one single day. And what it brings right now, we have a Zoom installer that has a malware hidden in it. We see a lot of people we have a bug bounty program, so a lot of extra time for them to try and poke holes at different organizations. So we will see the risk and fraud landscape and security vulnerability landscape also shift as more and more industries and people kind of become digital and how that sees. So for our profession as well will change quite a bit as a result from multiple aspects.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you all. We're up against the time here. Thank you all the panelists for your great insight. I want to thank the chapters, Washington, D.C., London, Singapore chapters for coming. Babur Kohi, who has administered this session. So I want to wish you all good health and prosperity, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.